Imagine for a second that you are running a country.
Okay, a lot of pressure right out of the gate.
Right. But seriously, picture it. A Category 5 hurricane has just made direct landfall.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
and it wipes out like 90% of your buildings.
Yeah.
Your primary industry, the very thing your people rely on to eat and trade, is just physically decimated overnight.
Just entirely gone.
Completely gone. And on top of that, you were sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars in international debt.
I mean, by all standard economic rules, your nation should just collapse at that point.
Exactly. It should fold. But today, we're doing a deep dive into a tiny island nation of just 70,000 people. That is, well, they're doing the impossible.
They really are.
They are surviving this literal climate apocalypse by turning their untouched rainforests into financial assets. And they're placing the entire weight of their economic recovery on the shoulders of an extraordinarily highly educated female workforce.
It honestly sounds like science fiction, or I don't know, like some kind of massive sociological experiment.
Yeah, but it is the actual daily reality of the Commonwealth of Dominica.
And that's what's so fascinating. We are analyzing a nation that operates under this constant existential threat, yet they somehow manage to continuously engineer their own survival.
Which is our mission for this deep dive. We are unpacking this really comprehensive, multidimensional academic research report on Dominica.
And it draws heavily on World Bank data, right?
Yes, exactly. Spanning all the way from 1960 to 2023. And just holding this report or, looking at it on a screen, it sets a very specific tone.
The visual presentation is so striking.
It is. Picture this stark, clinical white background. Right in the center is the country code, DMA, layered over this faint, almost ghostly gray outline of the island's geography.
It's very minimalist.
Super minimalist. And down in the corner, there are 4 crisp icons representing the dimensions we're exploring today: the economy, the society, the environment, and the governance structure.
Which is deceptively simple, honestly, considering the sheer chaos hidden within that data.
Chaos is the right word for it.
I mean, when you look at those 4 dimensions, you realize you aren't just looking at a standard economic summary. You're reading a survival diary.
Oh, I like that. A survival diary.
Yeah, because the data maps out how a sovereign state reacts when its baseline environment is actively hostile to its existence.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if I'm reading the underlying narrative of these 15 pages correctly, Dominica is walking this incredibly precarious tightrope.
A very thin tightrope.
Right. On one side, you have unimaginable ecological vulnerability. Like the wind is literally trying to blow them off the wire.
And on the other side?
On the other side, you have this stubborn, brilliant social adaptation that's keeping them upright. And to understand that balancing act, we really have to start with the bedrock.
The money.
The money. But right away, the data throws a wrench in how we usually think about economies.
Because for an island state, the economy isn't dictated by, central bank interest rates or tech innovation.
No, it is entirely at the mercy of the weather.
Let's contextualize the macro view of that economy, because the sheer scale of the growth is, well, it's the first major surprise in the report.
Yeah, lay the numbers on us.
So if you track the gross domestic product, the GDP, it grew from roughly $233 million in 1977 to $607 million in 2023.
Hold on, let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around the terminology here.
Sure.
Because the report specifically states this is calculated at 2015 constant prices. What does that actually mean for that 600 million figure?
That is a crucial detail to highlight. When economists use constant prices, they are basically stripping out the illusion of inflation.
Okay, so adjusting for how money changes value.
Exactly. Like if a loaf of bread cost $1 in 1977 and $5 in 2023, the economy didn't necessarily produce 5 times as much actual value.
But money just lost its purchasing power.
Right. So by anchoring the data to the value of the dollar in 2015, we are looking at the actual physical volume of goods and services produced.
Oh, wow.
So that leap from 233 million to 607 million represents real, tangible growth. It is nearly a 3 times multiplier of their actual economic output.
If I just read that one line in a vacuum, a 3x multiplier in real output, I'd assume this was a story of just smooth, uninterrupted prosperity.
Like an escalator slowly moving upward.
Yeah, just a nice steady climb.
You would think so, but that illusion completely shatters when you zoom in on the year-to-year data.
The line graph is wild.
It really is. The long-term trend line for GDP in the report isn't a smooth escalator at all. It's marred by these sharp, terrifying red arrows pointing straight down at specific years.
And the most glaring one, the one that really defines the early modern history of the island, is 1979.
The 1979 shock.
Yeah, the data shows the agricultural sector saw a plunge of negative 33.4% in growth in a single year.
Which is just a catastrophic number.
I need to pause on that. Because during the 2008 global financial crisis, the U.S. GDP shrank by roughly 4%, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that felt like the end of the world. Millions of people lost their homes. So how does a country even function after a 33.4% drop in its primary sector?
Well, honestly, it barely does, and we have to look at the mechanism of that drop.
Because it wasn't a banking collapse.
Exactly. This wasn't a crisis where numbers on a screen vanished due to bad mortgages or a stock market correction. This was the literal physical annihilation of capital.
Hurricane David.
Yes. 1979 was the year Hurricane David, a Category 5 storm, just sat over the island.
And when an economy relies heavily on agriculture, which Dominica did.
Right. Bananas, citrus, root crops. A hurricane doesn't just disrupt supply chains, it physically uproots your factory.
It snaps the trees in half.
It snaps the trees, it washes away the fertile topsoil, it completely obliterates the harvest. You don't just lose this year's income, you lose the biological machinery required to make next year's income.
It's like, imagine building a massive, highly optimized factory directly on top of an active fault line.
That's a great analogy.
You can hire the best managers, you can streamline your assembly line, but the moment the earth shakes, the factory's gone.
It doesn't matter how good your agricultural policies are if the wind simply deletes the farms.
Right. So eventually, if you want to survive, you have to stop rebuilding the factory on the fault line. You have to fundamentally change what your economy actually does.
Which is exactly what we see in the stacked area charts on page 4 of the report.
The economic shift.
Yeah, the data visualizes this massive drift in the economic center of gravity. In the late 1970s, the share of agriculture, forestry, and fishing made up about 25% of the total GDP.
So a quarter of the entire economy was tied to the soil.
Exactly. But by 2023, that number had plummeted to just 12.2%.
It basically got cut in half.
Yes.
But wait, if half of your foundational industry just vanishes over a few decades, that creates a massive vacuum. What filled it?
The service sector. As agriculture shrank, services expanded aggressively to fill the void. Today, the service sector has stabilized as the dominant force, sitting at 56.9% of the GDP in 2023.
Let's spend some time thinking about what that transition actually looks like on a human level.
It's a profound change.
Because moving from a 25% agricultural economy to a nearly 60% service economy isn't just a chart changing colors. It is a multi-generational cultural upheaval.
Absolutely.
We are talking about a grandfather who spent his life working a banana plantation, right?
Mm.
Whose son maybe tried to keep the farm alive but got wiped out by a hurricane in the 90s.
And then his granddaughter is now sitting in an air-conditioned office managing ecotourism bookings.
Exactly. Or working in IT or handling offshore financial services.
It is a forced evolution. I mean, nobody woke up one day and just decided, hey, let's abandon farming.
Right. It wasn't a trendy pivot.
No, it was a multi-decade adaptation to harsh climate realities. When your physical assets are continuously destroyed by weather, you transition to an economy based on human interaction, digital infrastructure, and experiences.
Because a hotel might lose its roof in a storm.
But a tour guide doesn't lose their knowledge of the local trails.
Right. And a digital services company can back up its data to the cloud.
Exactly. Services are slightly more insulated, or at least they are faster to reboot, than a field of ruined crops.
But hold on. Pivoting an entire national economy from bananas to digital services and tourism requires massive upfront capital.
Massive.
You need international airports, deep water ports for cruise ships, fiber optic cables. You need paved roads to the eco-resorts and power grids that don't fail.
All of which is incredibly expensive.
Right. And if you're a tiny island nation of 70,000 people whose farms keep getting flattened, you don't exactly have a giant vault of cash to pay for that infrastructure.
You don't. You borrow it.
Ah, the debt.
Yeah, and that brings us to the second major dimension of the report. The fiscal straitjacket.
The numbers here are just grim.
The data forces us to look at the mechanics of external debt, international aid, and the cost of living. because the societal transition we just described is staggeringly expensive.
The debt explosion shown in the charts is alarming. Long-term external debt skyrocketed from $14.2 million in the 1970s to approximately $210 million in current years.
It's a huge jump.
I mean, if you do the rough math, $210 million divided by 70,000 people, that is about $3,000 of international debt for every man, woman, and child on the island.
Which is heavy.
How hasn't the IMF or the World Bank just completely shut off their credit?
Because the international financial community understands what this report calls the fiscal constraints of development in climate-vulnerable states.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
Well, it is very easy for an outside observer to look at a rising debt curve and immediately scream, government mismanagement or reckless spending.
Right, like they're building luxury stadiums or something.
Exactly. But in Dominica's context, taking on debt is literally the cost of survival. Let's say the government borrows money to build a critical bridge connecting the capital to the airport.
Okay.
5 years later, a tropical storm washes the bridge away.
Oh, man.
They have to take on new debt to rebuild the exact same bridge. Then 10 years later, a stronger hurricane damages it again. They borrow again.
So they aren't borrowing money to build frivolous vanity projects.
No, they're borrowing just to maintain a baseline of modern civilization.
So they are paying twice, 3 times, 4 times for the exact same piece of concrete.
Yes.
That is infuriating. You can't ever get ahead if you are constantly paying off the interest on a bridge that no longer exists.
Precisely. And the data shows us exactly what happens when the physical destruction outpaces the government's ability to borrow on the open market.
You hit a breaking point.
You hit a point where you have to rely on international lifelines. The report tracks this through Official Development Assistance, or ODA.
I'm looking at the dual-axis chart in the report. It is a fascinating visual.
It really tells the story.
You have the long-term debt climbing steadily as this relentless line graph. But underneath it, you have ODA coming in as bar graphs.
And mostly, those bars are relatively low.
Right, it's steady background aid. But then, bam, there's this one massive anomalous spike.
2017.
Yeah, in 2017, the official development assistance hit an absolute peak, reaching roughly $69.49 million in a single year.
It dwarfs every other year on the chart.
It's huge. What triggered a nearly $70 million international wire transfer?
2017 was the year Hurricane Maria struck.
Oh, right.
It was a Category 5 hurricane, one of the most intense Atlantic storms on record, and it made a direct hit on Dominica.
Just a direct bullseye.
It didn't just damage the island, it essentially stripped it bare. The UN estimated that over 90% of the structures in the country were damaged or destroyed.
90%.
The electrical grid was obliterated. The agricultural sector, whatever was left of it from previous storms, was decimated again.
So that $69.49 million wasn't for development in the traditional sense.
Not at all. It was emergency life support from the international community just to prevent mass starvation and societal collapse.
Think about the psychological weight of that. If you are listening to this, imagine trying to plan your family's future or start a small business while living under that kind of volatility.
It's nearly impossible to plan.
You are trying to build a modern service economy, but you have this permanent sort of Damocles hanging over your head. You are $210 million in debt, and you know that at any moment the sky could darken, the wind could pick up, and you could be pushed right back to zero.
Waiting for foreign governments to send water purification tablets and MREs.
Exactly. How do you even draft a national budget around that level of unpredictability?
You build in massive contingencies, but honestly, the volatility inevitably bleeds into the daily lives of the citizens. The external shocks don't just hit the government's balance sheet, they hit the kitchen table.
Through inflation, right.
Yeah. The report gives us a very clear look at this through the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, and the GDP deflator trends.
So we're talking about purchasing power, the ability of the average Dominican to actually buy what they need to live.
Yes. The report uses the year 2010 as a baseline of 100 for the CPI.
Okay.
By 2023, the CPI had climbed to 120.9.
So 20-point jump.
Right. Now, the GDP deflator data shows that there were periods of intense high inflation pressures back in the 1970s, which makes sense given the global oil shocks combined with local disasters like Hurricane David.
Sure.
The modern trajectory is a bit more stable, but that climb to 120.9 over just over a decade tells a very specific story about the vulnerabilities of a service economy.
Let's break down why that CPI climb matters so much. If your country has pivoted away from agriculture, you are no longer growing your own food at scale.
Right, you're importing it.
You are transitioning to services, which means you are importing almost everything. The chicken in the grocery store, the fuel for the eco tour buses, the concrete for the hotels, the laptops for the IT workers.
Everything.
It all has to come in on a boat.
And that is the trap. When your CPI climbs over 20 points, it means your local currency buys significantly less of those imported necessities.
So if you are a tour guide in Dominica, your income is reliant on foreign tourists showing up.
But your expenses are dictated by global commodity prices.
Exactly. Every time there is a supply chain hiccup in Asia, or global shipping rates spike, or fuel prices rise, the average citizen in Dominica feels it immediately at the grocery checkout.
They are double exposed. They are physically exposed to the weather of the Caribbean, and they are economically exposed to the weather of the global supply chain.
So if we pause and look at the board, we have an economy structurally forced away from farming into services,
Financed by a mountain of external debt,
periodically crushed by hurricanes.
and highly vulnerable to global inflation.
It paints a picture of extreme precarity, which really leads us to the most important question of the report. Who are the people actually enduring this? Who makes up the society carrying this load?
Well, the demographic data is where the narrative shifts from economics to sociology. We are looking at an island population that has essentially flatlined.
Just completely leveled out.
Yeah, it has been hovering around the 70,000 mark for decades.
Yeah.
The natural growth rate has plateaued.
70,000 people. I mean, that is the size of a medium-sized suburb in the U.S. or a small provincial town in Europe.
It's very small.
But here, that population makes up an entire sovereign nation. They have their own parliament, their own international diplomats, their own infrastructure networks to maintain.
And the geographic reality of where those 70,000 people physically live is pretty terrifying.
Oh, the infographic in the report.
Yeah.
It has these metric cards around a map, and one data point absolutely leaps off the page. Roughly 4% of the rural population lives in coastal areas that are less than 5 meters above sea level,
5 meters is roughly 16 feet.
which doesn't sound like much of a buffer.
It isn't. When you factor in the storm surges associated with Category 4 or 5 hurricanes, which can easily exceed 15 feet, plus the long-term baseline projections for global sea level rise.
Living less than 5 meters above sea level isn't a theoretical risk.
No, it is an immediate existential hazard.
It's not a debate about what might happen in the year 2100. It's a hazard every single time hurricane season starts.
So why do they live there? Why not just move inland?
Well, the interior of Dominica is famous for being incredibly mountainous and rugged. It's thick, vertical rainforest.
So you can't really build a massive city in there.
Exactly. Human settlement naturally gets squeezed to the edges. They're physically trapped between the steep, impassable mountains behind them and the rising, warming ocean in front of them.
And that physical geographic squeeze is perfectly mirrored by a demographic squeeze.
How so?
The age structure of the population is undergoing a radical structural transformation. The report tracks this through dependency ratios, which compare the number of dependents, meaning youths and the elderly, against the working age population.
The numbers here blew my mind. The youth dependency ratio plummeted.
Massively.
In 1960, it was 89.7%. That means for every 100 working-age adults, there were nearly 90 children to feed, clothe, and educate.
It was a very young society.
Very young. But recently, that number has dropped to roughly 49%. The birth rate has completely fallen off a cliff.
It's a massive demographic transition. But while the youth ratio was plummeting, the elderly dependency ratio steadily climbed.
Right.
It went from 10.9% in 1960 to 18.7% recently.
So the older population is growing while the younger population is shrinking.
Exactly. If you look at the population pyramids in the report comparing 1960 to 2023, you can literally see the architecture of the society changing.
The shape is totally different.
The wide, heavy base of children from 1960 has hollowed out, and the top sections representing the elderly have widened significantly.
I like to visualize this as a building. Think of the working-age population as the middle floors.
Okay.
They're getting squeezed from both the floor above and the floor below. They have to financially support a growing, aging population that requires pensions, advanced health care, and social safety nets.
But simultaneously, the pipeline of young workers coming up from the bottom floors to replace them is shrinking rapidly.
The working middle is carrying an incredibly heavy, disproportionate load.
Which brings us to a critical inflection point for the nation's survival strategy. If your population is capped at 70,000, and your pipeline of new youth entering the workforce is shrinking drastically, how do you sustain a modern, competitive service economy?
You cannot afford to lose a single mind.
You really can't.
If you have fewer kids, every single one of those kids has to reach their absolute maximum potential. You need every one of them to become an engineer, a doctor, a software developer, or an entrepreneur.
Every single worker becomes infinitely more valuable to the state's survival.
Which leads us perfectly into the fourth dimension of the report, the human capital engine. And the data here presents a fascinating duality.
It really does. It shows one of the greatest public health triumphs in the region, alongside one of the most shocking societal disparities.
Let's start with the triumph, because it proves that policy actually works. Over the last few decades, Dominica's public health initiatives have been phenomenally successful.
Look at the under 5 mortality rate.
Yes, which global health experts use as the ultimate barometer for a society's basic functioning. It dropped from roughly 132 deaths per 1,000 live births in 1960, all the way down to about 35 recently.
That is incredible progress.
And neonatal deaths are at an extreme low. The area chart tracking this just drops like a stone. It shows that when a government invests in maternal health, clean water, and vaccination programs, they save thousands of lives.
It is a massive foundational achievement, but surviving childhood is just the absolute baseline.
Right.
To understand economic potential, the World Bank uses a specific metric called the Human Capital Index, or HCI.
Explain how that works.
The HCI measures a combination of survival rates, expected years of quality-adjusted schooling, and broad health outcomes. It basically calculates how much economic potential a child born today will actually unlock by the time they grow up.
And how does Dominica score?
Dominica scores a 0.54 out of a possible 1.0.
Let's translate that 0.54 into plain English. It means that a child born today in Dominica will only unlock 54% of their future economic productivity compared to a hypothetical scenario where they enjoyed perfect health and a complete world-class education.
Basically, almost half of the nation's human potential is just being left on the table due to systemic frictions in health and schooling.
Which is a tough pill to swallow when you need every single worker to be at their best.
Exactly. But here is where we have to dig beneath the national average. That 0.54 is hiding the defining social phenomenon of modern Dominica.
The gender gap.
Yes. When the researchers split the Human Capital Index by gender, a massive fracture appears.
HECI for females is 0.59, but for males, it drops significantly to 0.52.
That is a massive gap in human potential.
And when you look at the education data that feeds into that index, the disparity is glaring from the very first days of a child's life. In pre-primary education, the gross enrollment rate for females is 90.7%. For males, it is only 70.1%.
We need to pause on that. It starts at age 3 or 4.
Wow.
The boys are already falling 20 percentage points behind before they even reach the first grade of primary school.
And this gap doesn't close as they grow, it accelerates.
Look at the secondary education data.
Yeah, the female gross enrollment rate hits an astonishing 112%.
It's wild.
Wait, 112%. Let me make sure I'm not misreading this. How can enrollment be over 100%? Mathematically, you can't have more than all of the girls enrolled.
It's a quirk of how demographers calculate gross enrollment.
Okay, lay it out of me.
The formula compares the total number of students enrolled in a specific level of education, regardless of how old they are, to the population of the age group that officially corresponds to that level.
Oh, I see.
So if secondary school is officially for ages 13 to 17, but you have a massive influx of 19, 20, or even 25-year-old women returning to school to get their diplomas, the numerator becomes larger than the denominator.
So when gross enrollment goes over 100%, it almost always indicates a society where education is highly valued and older demographics are actively re-entering the system to upskill.
Exactly. You have a society where women aren't just attending secondary school on time. Adult women are aggressively returning to finish their education.
They are accumulating human capital at a ravenous pace.
Meanwhile, the men are lagging terribly.
Why? Why are 3-year-old boys not in preschool? The data doesn't give us a qualitative interview with these families, but we have to ask the question.
Is it early socialization?
Are families in a rural, post-hurricane economy pulling young boys into whatever informal labor or agricultural work is left?
While the data doesn't explicitly state the cause, it reveals the systemic outcome perfectly.
Right.
The report concludes with a very powerful statement. Women's exceptional performance in health and education is the core potential of the nation's development.
We are looking at a society whose transition to a modern service economy is being almost entirely driven by its women.
If the new economy requires communication skills, digital literacy, and administration,
And the women are the ones securing the education required for those roles.
then the women become the new economic foundation of the state.
And we see that economic power directly translating into political and legal power. The report points out that the traditional glass ceiling is cracking.
The proportion of female parliamentary seats has risen rapidly in recent years.
Furthermore, the Women, Business, and the Law Index, the WBL, which measures legal equality and economic opportunities like property rights, workplace protections, and pension equality, has climbed steadily, reaching 62.5 in 2023.
This isn't just a slight demographic lean.
No, we are observing a profound sociological shift where a nation is being economically and increasingly politically anchored by its women.
It's a fascinating dynamic. The men, historically tied to the physical labor of the agricultural sector, face a structural disadvantage when hurricanes repeatedly wipe out that sector.
And the women, who have monopolized the educational pathways, are perfectly positioned to dominate the incoming service sector.
It is a transition born of environmental necessity and fueled by educational disparity.
Okay, let's take a breath and stack up everything we've discovered so far.
It's a lot.
We have a tiny nation of 70,000 people. They were violently forced to abandon farming and pivot to a service-based economy because of catastrophic hurricanes.
Okay.
They are carrying a crushing $210 million in external debt to pay for this survival. They have a shrinking pipeline of youth and a growing elderly population.
Right.
And this entire precarious high-wire balancing act is being carried on the shoulders of highly educated women.
Sounds impossible.
How does a system under this much pressure not just snap? What is their actual defense mechanism?
That brings us to the final and perhaps most vital dimension of the report: environmental guardianship and institutional resilience.
The safety mechanisms keeping Dominica from collapse consist of two very different things. First, the physical ecology of the island itself. And second, the invisible architecture of the people running the government.
Let's examine the physical shield first.
The green shield. The data points out that Dominica maintains a massive 64% forest cover.
Over 6/10 of the entire country is untouched, dense natural forest.
This isn't just about having pretty scenery for the ecotourists. This is a vital, globally significant natural carbon sink.
And when you look at their total greenhouse gas emissions, excluding land use changes, it is microscopic.
We are talking about roughly 0.15 million tons of CO2 equivalent per year.
On a global scale, they are essentially a carbon neutral, if not carbon negative, society.
By maintaining that 64% forest cover, they are actively pulling carbon out of the atmosphere,
They are providing a vital environmental service to the rest of the planet.
which really highlights the brutal, tragic irony of global climate change.
It really does.
Dominica contributes practically zero to global warming. Their carbon footprint is a rounding error compared to a single industrial city in the U.S. or China.
But because they are an island situated in Hurricane Alley in the Caribbean, they suffer the most catastrophic, apocalyptic consequences of the warming oceans.
They didn't cause the problem, but they pay the highest price. I will note, however, that the report does highlight one area of local environmental friction.
Right, the air quality metric.
The PM 2.5 air pollution exposure is listed at 20.6 micrograms per cubic meter.
Let's explain what PM 2.5 means, because 20.6 micrograms sounds kind of abstract.
Sure.
PM 2.5 refers to particulate matter in the air that is so infinitesimally tiny less than 2.5 microns in width that it bypasses your lungs' natural defenses and enters directly into your bloodstream.
And the World Health Organization guideline is to keep this under 5 micrograms.
Exactly. So at 20.6, they are 4 times over the recommended limit.
It's not the choking black smog you might see in a heavy manufacturing hub, but it is a persistent daily respiratory friction.
It's likely caused by local factors, things like burning trash, cooking with solid fuels, or just a fleet of older diesel-heavy vehicles on the island.
So while they aren't warming the globe, there is definitely work to be done on the local air quality for the health of those 70,000 citizens.
The local environment definitely has room for optimization, but their global environmental stewardship is undeniable.
Now, how does a country leverage that stewardship? How do you survive the massive debt and the endless storms?
This raises an incredibly important question about the invisible architecture we mentioned, governance.
The report features a radar chart mapping the worldwide governance indicators, or WGI.
And the numbers are staggering for a developing nation operating under this much relentless stress.
They rank incredibly well in political stability.
The metric for voice and accountability, which essentially measures free press, free elections, and the ability of citizens to participate in selecting their government, sits at a high 72.5 percentile for 2023.
And their rule of law indicators show a transparent governance environment with highly effective anti-corruption capabilities.
We have to connect the dots here because the WGI isn't just a feel-good scorecard.
It is the core mechanism of their survival.
Why does political stability matter? Because you cannot survive periodic economic wipeouts, manage $210 million in sovereign debt, and orchestrate massive national rebuilding efforts if your government is busy fighting internal coups or embezzling funds.
Let's go back to that massive $69 million spike in official development assistance after Hurricane Maria in 2017.
Okay.
Think of good governance here, not as some abstract ideal, but as an internationally recognized credit score.
That's exactly what it is.
If your government is corrupt or unstable, foreign aid agencies and international banks do not wire you $69 million.
They know the money will end up in offshore bank accounts or buying luxury cars for politicians.
Right. The transparency and stability of the Dominican government is the exact reason why the international community trusts them with emergency capital.
Foreign donors know that if they send money to Dominica, it will actually be used to buy concrete, rebar, and water purification systems.
Their pristine governance rating is literally their ultimate survival tool. It unlocks the vault when the hurricane hits.
It is a brilliant way to frame it. The report's conclusion synthesizes this entire journey perfectly.
It lays out three distinct pillars for Dominica's future, and they are inextricably linked to every contradiction and adaptation we've discussed today.
Let's walk through them. First is growth resilience.
The report argues they have to fully accept their absolute reliance on the service sector. Farming is never coming back as the dominant force.
But they must engineer massive financial and physical buffers into that service economy.
Right. They can't stop the hurricanes from hitting the hotels, so they have to build hotels that can withstand the wind and maintain financial reserves to weather the months when tourism stops.
The second pillar is capital potential. They have to maximize their human capital advantage.
Specifically, they need to continue elevating and leveraging this highly educated, female-led workforce, which is currently the engine of the nation.
But simultaneously, they have to figure out the sociological puzzle of bringing the men and boys back into the educational fold.
If they can close that male education gap, that national HCI score of 0.54 will rise, unlocking massive new economic potential.
And the third pillar is risk hedging. To me, this is the most fascinating and aggressive economic strategy in the entire report.
They have an urgent need to escape that $210 million external debt trap.
And the researchers suggest they do this by monetizing what they already have, that 64% forest cover.
Through global climate trade, carbon offsets, and biodiversity credits, they can essentially demand that the heavily industrialized, polluting nations pay them for maintaining the lungs of the planet.
It fundamentally flips the script on international development. Instead of begging for aid after a disaster, Dominica can position itself as a global service provider.
If they are sinking carbon that European or North American factories are emitting, they should be compensated for that service.
That compensation can pay down the sovereign debt, build the necessary climate buffers, and fully fund the education system.
It turns their geography from a liability into their greatest financial asset.
It's an incredible blueprint.
So what does this all mean for you? If you are listening to this right now, maybe you're commuting to work or managing your household budget or just trying to navigate a world that feels increasingly volatile.
We usually measure a country's power by the size of its GDP, the tonnage of its manufacturing exports, or the reach of its military.
By those metrics, a tiny island of 70,000 people barely registers.
But look closely at Dominica.
If true national resilience in the 21st century means surviving apocalyptic climate events, pivoting an entire economy on the fly, leveraging untouched rainforests as financial carbon assets, and relying on a highly educated female workforce to rebuild from the ashes of destroyed farms. Wait, I mean, if that's the new standard, are the massive, slow-moving, industrialized nations actually the fragile ones?
That is a profound question.
Next time you hear a headline about a developing island nation, ask yourself, who is really leading the way in learning how to survive the future? Keep questioning the data around you.